Okay, now finishing up the effective object project. What we did at the end last time is we had gotten our exposures, we had chosen our best exposure, we had played with it in all these various ways. Starting with our raw exposure, doing a simple levels adjustment, playing with channel mixer to try to get to a neutral white background. An important step, and you see how that automatically brings more full spectrum color to your object, especially when it's lit in an environment like an interior classroom with a lot of yellow fluorescence. Then we can augment that and improve that with our color balance adjustments. And these are all just all over adjustments. And then I like to enhance the levels one more time after I've done that color balance. And then we go into the little tool-based alterations. So up to this point, we've just affected the entire exposure in a similar way. And now I start burning in using a tool, and I like to use a tablet for this so I can get pressure sensitivity. So using the burn tool first on midtones at a low exposure. The next duplicate layer, I dodged in some highlights, so bringing that form back. And you can be the judge if you think that that helps or not, but it definitely shifts the emphasis and the lighting pretty dramatically. And so you really have a lot of control. And you want to remember that when you're dodging and burning, you are not painting. You are simply doing exactly what people have done in the darkroom from the very beginning. You are bringing out certain parts of the exposure more than other parts. Right? Okay, then we can use the blur tool. And this is so subtle as to be hardly noticeable. But I did it on the ear here. This back edge. So it was like this, then I just took the blur tool, which is right above the dodge and burn tools. And with a very strong, with 100% strong blur, I painted over this ear until it got more out of focus. Now looking back at that and reviewing that, that might have been a little too strong. And that's why I do it on these copies, so that I can always take the opacity down and blend it back together. But overall, let me see, how much do I want that blurred? Maybe about 60%. So we don't get caught up there so much. Our eye gets up to this nice clean edge and surface and highlight and sees these textures for what they are. All right. So next, we get into vignetting. And a vignette on its own is basically just burning the edges very softly around the whole photo. Any kind of vignette is just when you treat the outside edges of the photo differently than you treat the rest of the photo. And my vignette is so subtle, but I think it will help. You do not want it to call attention to itself. And you also, when you burn, you want to be sure you're not making it too colorful. And sometimes when we do, it will really distract. And so what I'll often do is I'll cut out the vignette, as I did here. So if I turn all of these off, you'll see how my vignette is cut out as a frame around it, with certain parts that got too dark even erased through. But you can think of it as framing your object for sure. And even though using duplicate layers like this uses up a lot of memory, I like it in my PSDs because it reminds me of every step I took, and if I feel I went the wrong direction one way, that helps to show it to me. All right, so here's everything together. And if I simply go through my layers, it will show me all the choices I made. Also, I like having a vignette on a separate layer so that I can play with its opacity. So right now it's at 59%. I can decide to make that stronger, up to 100, or take it down all the way. And I might decide to make it just a little bit stronger. Maybe 70% instead of 60. All right. Now, this is a commercial quality photo. You want to check every part of it and make sure it's nice and clean. And this is where we can get into some retouching techniques. One thing is I noticed that my burning looks a little bit brighter right here than right here. So I might take just that vignette edge and pull it out a little bit more so it's more even. And then also shooting on light backgrounds is very difficult because it's very hard to get rid of all the schmutz. And so let me show you some basic retouching. I'm not going to do it on these individual layers. You see how these little dots that were in the white that are part of my frame move with the vignette, and there are different opacities, and I'd have to do it to each layer. So now to do final retouching, like spot treatments, I am going to flatten everything, but instead of losing all these layers, I'm going to hold down Option, go to the layer options up at the top, and say Merge Visible. But make sure you have Option held down. And that will create a 100% opacity layer on top of everything that merges everything together. So now it's all in one layer. And why that's helpful for when we do final spot correcting is now everything is in one layer. So little spots, how do you fix them? It's easy enough. The basic tool that all of these are based on is called the clone stamp tool. So this is the one you really want to understand. And the clone stamp tool will basically, based on a brush that you choose, so I'll pick a brush about that size, and I'm going to choose, just to show you, a 100% hardness, which is not a good way to do it, but just so you can see it really clearly, and an opacity of 100%. We need to start getting comfortable with this tool. So the way you use it is you hold down your Option button to target an area within your exposure to copy from, to clone. So if I take this very in focus part and I click there, now wherever I start painting, it will clone that and paint it in. So pretty straightforward. So how is it helpful in retouching? Well, you'll see up here in your clone stamp options, you want to have it in normal mode. You want to always have your flow 100% and instead control it with your opacity. And you want to sample from, you want to be aware of what you're sampling from. Because I'm only on one combined layer, it doesn't matter if I'm doing all layers or not. It could be current layer as well. But you can sample from combinations of layers, but you're painting only onto one layer. And so often what I'll do is actually make a new blank layer above my flattened full layer, and I will call it clone stamp, because this is a unique touch-up layer. And I'll set my brush to have a very soft edge, 0% hardness. You see the difference there if I paint That edge is really soft. And then if I'm retouching, like I'm going to be showing you, and spot correcting, I don't like to have it at 100% opacity. I like to build it up a little bit more slowly. So I'll put it more at like 50% opacity. And this is just the most basic retouching tool. So if I see that little spot there, I can target over to the side, and I have it sampling from all layers. So even though I'm on a blank clone stamp layer, it's going to copy what's underneath. And then I can paint, copying from that place. And because I'm doing it at a low opacity, I can hit it a few different times. I can even sample from different places to get rid of those spots. This is sometimes called airbrushing in photography, especially commercial photography. It's like, how do you get rid of the little imperfections? Well, you just paint over them. So we are painting over them with clone stamp here. Now it's easy to go too far, and that's why I like to do it on a separate layer. So I'll see that there's slight variations here, where it's a little bit lighter on the edge of my shadow before it gets to my vignetting, where it gets a little bit darker. And so I might decide, oh, I want to kind of clone stamp in there a little bit. Dull that down. But if you overdo it, it starts to become apparent and overworked. If you want more specific clone stamping tools or retouch tools, let's say I wanted to get rid of the tic-tac-toe game on this guy's head. So I could clone stamp and spend quite a while trying to clean him up. But there are some other methods that use that same thinking and try to save you some time, because that's a lot of painting and clone stamping. And remember, this is all on a separate layer, so I can just turn it off and on if I want to. Okay, so instead, what I can do is go 2 up from the clone stamp, which is underneath the brush tool, to what's called the spot healing brush. And these are the healing tools. And I can simply pick a brush, and I can paint an area that I want to be fixed. But it won't work on its own layer, right? It will only work if the pixels are there. So it's a little bit riskier than using clone stamp on its own layer. But it works quite well, and the way it works is that it samples from what's around. It's getting stuck here. Takes some processing. It samples from the pixels that are around where you paint, and it fills in the space with a pattern recognition algorithm that tries to match those pixels. So it can take a while. I try to force it sometimes by switching another tool. And this way, I mean, it's great for getting rid of tattoos. But it can end up looking very sharp edge sometimes and a little phony. You see how the focus doesn't quite match where I'm painting. But between those two tools, you should be able to kind of retouch anything you need. For large areas that you don't want to have to fill in completely, you can use the patch tool. And the patch tool, and again, you have to be in the layer, so I'm going to have to undo all of this, but you would take a big section that you want to repair and fill in,